Hello, Blogging Heads Nation. It's Heather Hurlburt once again. Republican National Convention week this week, coming to you just for a little spontaneity from New York with
Eli Lake, New York Sun, coming you from the Twin Cities in Minnesota for the National Republican Convention, the Republican National Convention.
So, Eli, I was just saying what an amazing irony it is that I spent last week in Denver at what was an incredibly well-organized, well-orchestrated, on-time, carefully thought-out convention, and you are in Minnesota at the seat of your pants. What the heck happens next? Who knows who's speaking today? Republican convention. What's that like?
It's kind of fun. I spent some time with the Louisiana delegation, some of whom had flown up from the chartered plane from Jackson, Mississippi. You're right that a lot of the things that are on schedules and other kind of events around town in the Twin City area, you don't know who's going to be there and what time things are going to be happening. There certainly is a sense of kind of anticipation and waiting kind of turned to boredom. David Frum had an interesting comment. Yesterday was a little bit like a snow day because nobody kind of knew what to do, but it looks like things are going to be coming up. Getting started. There's going to be a cramped convention starting. Today is Tuesday, and it's going to start, I guess, Tuesday evening, and then tomorrow is the big Sarah Palin introduction to America, and then John McCain on Thursday.
What do Republicans do on a snow day is what I really want to know.
Well, there was a working family that had been tied to a stake, and people were encouraged to throw rotten fruit at them. There was an interactive map of the nation of Iran where you could sort of push buttons of places where you'd like to bomb. I'm just joking around, everybody. That's a joke. I'm kidding. It's a joke. I was just joking around. I can do that.
But that was two very creative ideas. I don't know that I would have come up with them so fast unless it involved burning a single mother at the stake.
Okay, I'm kidding. I'm just joking around. No, I mean, listen.
But see, now
there are all these parties that are sponsored by various groups. Some of them, kind of with interest in mind. Some of them kind of corporate things, and people go to those at night. There's a lot of hanging around. This talk radio row was still going. People were excited, still talking about Sarah Palin and of course Hurricane Gustav. And and journalists are trying to come up with a story. I mean, I wrote about Sarah Palin yesterday. I'm going to write about Sarah Palin today. It's kind of the story that keeps giving.
Yeah, and we had a very rare directive from the unseen headquarters of Blogging Heads. I don't think I've ever been told what to say right before. But the directive you and I got was, we can't get enough Sarah Palin. So, okay, Sarah Palin, here we go. But as I said to you before, in my view, Sarah Palin is kind of incidental to this, and it's really all about John McCain and his judgment. So let me get this straight. A year ago, the woman was a member of the Alaska Independence Party, which favors seceding from the United States. She is Ms. Earmark for her community in Alaska, which John McCain, goes out in public and rails against. She said that she had been too busy with Alaska state business to really form an opinion on the Iraq War. And then her main concern about the Iraq War, given that she had been too busy to form an opinion on it, was to express concern that we had an exit plan. And then, which I thought was entirely appropriate, I just don't think that it's worked out this way, that we should all be praying very hard to make sure that the war was following God's purposes, which, as I say, I think is entirely appropriate. It's just our prayers haven't been answered, as far as I can tell. And then, of course, that a bunch of things about her personal life, which, regardless of what you think about them, it does seem like kind of not the ideal moment to be running for vice president, which leads back to the question of what the hell was McCain thinking?
May I respond?
Please.
She hunts, she fishes, her moose burgers are delicious. That's what I just came up with. I just came up with. No, listen. First of all, on some of that stuff, she has been. I don't know, at first she said she was, when she was campaigning on this bridge to nowhere, but eventually, she did take on Frank Murkowski, who was a fairly established old-line Republican in the state party machine in Alaska. She was an insurgent candidate, and it was a good thing, yes.
She was for it before she was against it.
No, what I'm saying is that we're going to get to know Sarah Palin, and let's be honest, a lot of us don't know, and that's an interesting thing about getting to know Sarah Palin, because this week, before she gives her speech, I think originally she was scheduled to meet with various interest groups and various sort of types in the Republican Party, and that has all largely been canceled, except for something with Phyllis Schlafly with the Republican Right to Life Coalition, which is going on later this afternoon after we tape. And then, then there's then we're going to find out, I guess, tomorrow in her speech how she delivers a speech and largely sort of what she thinks. But when I was going around talking to both delegates and senators and big shot Republicans and sort of saying, well, Orrin Hatch, you care about federalism. What do you think about Sarah Palin? Have you gotten a chance to talk to her yet about, her view of the Constitution? And she and his response was, he was fairly confident. For example, Norm Coleman's, when I asked about foreign policy issues and Sarah Palin, his response was, well, I'm voting for the top of the ticket, McCain. I agree with him, and I think that that's what the administration's going to look like. But in due time, we'll all get a chance to know Sarah Palin. But the bottom line is most Republicans really don't know where she is on anything substantive in a wide range of issues, except we know that, she's a hunter, and she's got the picture. There's a photograph of her with those yellow eye shade glasses, that she knows how to gut a salmon, that her husband is a champion snowmobiler. I mean, so there are all these kind of like cultural indications about Sarah Palin that appeal very much to the Republican base. And I got to tell you, when I talked to delegates about Sarah Palin, they were absolutely excited. I talked to a woman from Castle Rock, Colorado, who said she was so excited about the selection of Sarah Palin as John McCain's running mate that she turned around in her station wagon, went home, and put on a dress. I don't know what that means, but there's a palpable thing. And the final thing I would say is this. Everyone talked about Hillary versus Obama, and will the Hillary supporters get behind Obama, and what about Bill Clinton, and so forth and so on. And I thought that was a real story. But there's also a real story that most of the Republican base, most of the people who are kind of American conservatives, don't like John McCain for a variety of reasons. I think largely in part for affectations, but also because of some of where he is on the issues. And he just solved that problem by picking a woman who maybe could appeal to other independent women, though in just an informal canvassing of my sister and my mom, I don't think that's going to happen. They were Hillary supporters, and they're like, I don't like this Sarah Palin at all. And I'm like, wait a second, but she's a woman.
I mean, just to veer off on that for a second, you imagine how embarrassed everybody would have been for John McCain if he had gone out and chosen a black Republican. Yeah. And this, to me, is only marginally less embarrassing than that. And that has nothing to do with Governor Palin's qualifications or lack of qualifications or anything about her. The odd thing about this is she's such a fascinating individual with such a very particular story, which we're all about to learn way more about than maybe some of us want to. But in fact, what's happening has just nothing to do with her, and so these sort of two dynamics are intersecting. And
Heather, what do you think of Bristol Palin? What do you think of that?
It's a very interesting experience for me because it's the first time I've sort of confronted all these issues as a parent, sort of thinking about this in terms of, oh God, if this were my kid.
Right.
I mean, what I think is this, this is something that happens in families, and I also agree totally with what Obama said that, this is just off limits.
Yeah.
I have a set of strong, I will readily cop to being as ambitious as the next person and to struggling just as hard as the next working parent with how do you balance these things, and so I have a pretty hard and fast rule that you don't criticize other people's choices. But I sure know what I hope I would do, or for that matter, what my husband would do if one of us found ourselves being asked to do something this demanding while we had that many challenges at home. I think what I hope it means is that the dad is going to be home full time helping Bristol figure out how to deal with motherhood and marriage, and I think that's great. I'll be glad to see the dad stepping up in that way, but it's not a position I can imagine for myself. And beyond that, I just think this is something that happens, and it's sad and it's tragic, and I hope they figure out how to deal with it. And I wish they could figure out how to deal with it not in the national limelight. And again, I go back to John McCain. What was he thinking? He supposedly knew about this beforehand. Again, totally regardless.
Do you
of
believe
the
that, by the
views.
way, that he knew about it beforehand? Because if he knew about it beforehand, wouldn't he be introduced? Here's Sarah Palin, her husband Todd Palin, and here's the Palin family, and here's Bristol Palin and her fiancé, whatever the guy's name is. I forget his name.
Yeah, that's
I don't
another
know.
very interesting
Cougar
point.
Palin.
Yeah,
what?
Right. I mean, look, either McCain knew in advance and is guilty of appallingly poor judgment by choosing to thrust this family into the limelight at this time, or he didn't know in advance and he's guilty of A, appallingly poor judgment in not conducting a more serious vetting progress, and B, he's guilty of lying to us about it now.
Well, keep in mind, his advisors told all the reporters, including me, his advisors said they knew about it beforehand. He didn't come out and say that. His advisors said it.
Hey,
I'm just saying it's interesting. It was all on background, too. It was all like, well, just off the record. He knew about it. And if you read all the stories, including mine, everybody quotes an advisor to the McCain campaign saying that. Nobody quotes John McCain saying it. No one quotes an advisor by name. Usually that's a sign. As a journalist for some time, But here's the other thing. I'm going to risk. Can I risk saying something horribly inappropriate? I don't want to be so inappropriate, but it is in the news cycle. I didn't. Reuters broke the story, and I don't know. I mean, listen. I am here in the Republican convention, and a lot of delegates are like, "Listen, this is a beautiful thing. Two people are a child is about to be born. They're going to be married. That's a positive thing. We should be celebrating." I mean, I got that from a lot of people, including, I might add, Michael Steele, the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, told me that. And that there's no reason to sort of treat it as a sort of shameful event. Other people had a different take a little bit. But isn't that a little weird? 17 years old. There was, for a long time, I remember, a fairly significant bipartisan movement against teen pregnancy. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like it's a little... I don't know what to make of it. But I'm just saying that I think, from the perspective of family, I don't have children, but I'm saying if I did, I would imagine I wouldn't want my 17-year-old daughter getting married at such a young age. It seems like, don't you have to go to college? And I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Eli, I mean, I don't know how to break this to you, but teenagers have sex.
No, I know they do. I'm not saying that they don't have sex. I'm just saying that, use birth control.
As we know, there's a higher rate of teenage pregnancy among conservative communities exactly because the kids are not encouraged to know about and be ready to use birth control. And so when you do get into a situation that you have sex, you're much less likely to feel comfortable whipping out or asking your partner to whip out the condom. And therefore, as we know, pregnancy is more likely to result, which is one reason that the conservative view on sex education turns out to get people into these kinds of situations. And the other thing is, and I mean, I feel like you and I have sort of swapped positions on this, which is always fun. But no, if it were my child, I would say, I'm very proud that you want to keep the child, and I'll be there to help you fulfill your responsibility to it. But part of you fulfilling your responsibility is that you're going to finish high school and go to college, and I would encourage you to think very, very seriously about whether you want to commit the rest of your life to this person, because I'm very conservative on matters of marriage and divorce, and I assume the Palins are too, which is why I don't believe in getting married at 17, but some people in the culture do, and I think you say, okay, that's your choice, and good luck to you. And I've been married 8.5 years, and lots of luck, as I said. I'm sure glad I didn't try it when I wasn't ready to get married when I was 17. But, it's none of my business. I can watch it with a certain open-mouthed astonishment, but ultimately it doesn't, I think they're trying to make the best of it with the value system they have, and that's really sort of all you can ask of anybody. But again, to me, the question goes back to McCain and his advisors who, knowing some of this, you wouldn't choose to push a family into the spotlight under those circumstances. And I think, Obama has spoken so eloquently in all of, Michelle Obama's well-documented hesitations about pushing their family into the limelight. This is exactly why.
All right, I just want to say a couple more things about this. One, for all of the politicians who are like, it's a private family matter, and I agree, it is a private family matter, but speaking as a member of the media, come on, you can't just put this out there and not expect us to obsess about it. It's a great story, and also it oddly follows the plot of the movie Juno, which is the capital of Alaska. Have you seen the movie Juno?
One of the consequences of having a small child is that I very rarely see.
No, but it's a really good. It's a really good movie, and it's about this. It's about a 17-year-old who gets pregnant and keeps the baby, and meets the parents who are going to. It's a very good movie, and it's a movie, by the way, that conservatives really liked. And from the perspective on the life side of the abortion debate, I guess in some ways this is a very, very happy story. And I'm not begrudging it. I'm just saying that it's I don't know what I think of it, but I also want to just stress, come on, you can't expect that the media wouldn't write about this and obsess about it and talk about it. I think most Americans are talking about it. The vice presidential candidate for the Republicans has a daughter who's 17 years old, who's about to give birth, and they're going to get married, and, it's people talk about that in small towns, people talk about that in their neighborhoods, and people are going to talk about it when it's the vice president,
Well, I mean, again, to go back to my critique of McCain and his advisors on this, Governor Palin, Alaska politics is not national politics. You get into national, you have no idea what is about to land on you when you get into presidential politics. And I think, you saw that with some of the contenders, especially in the Republican primary this time, who kind of jumped in, not really necessarily understanding what the demands of presidential campaigning were going to be like. And so I feel that it's sort of it was the McCain people's job to say, hey, you may think you can handle this, but, the national campaign is not Pasilla. And you need to think again very hard. You need to go back and look at some of the tapes of, I'm just trying to think, the Clintons, in terms of how the media will go after you and will go after your family. Because you're right, we all say, oh, it's terrible when they drag the family members into it, but then we all read the stories and we all buy the paper with the headlines. Yep. So, we have met the enemy and it is us. So you're totally right.
Well,
of course, if we all refused to buy it and if I weren't clicking on those links, then the stories wouldn't get written. But because I did spend the half an hour before this call clicking on all the links and catching up on all the dirt, like everybody else. So
I don't know if I would call it dirt. I mean, it is kind of a nice. I'm just saying it's an interesting, fascinating kind of story that people are going to write about. I'm certainly writing about it, and I don't know this notion about things are not appropriate. You should leave it, and we should sort of no one ever sticks to the issues. That the media gets to determine what the issues are. But I would say that it is. You raise this interesting question about thrusting, Sarah Palin and the Palin family into the spotlight as they're going through this thing that is going to affect the whole family, which is their daughter who is about to give birth and get married, and that's enough on your plate right there. But then again, I just want to stress we don't know yet, and she still has to really give that speech, and then at a certain point she's going to have to face the media. They've done a very good job of keeping her from the media up to now, and I know that she's being tutored at a certain level, I guess, by Randy Shinneman of the McCain campaign. And the other thing I would say about the McCain campaign, before I lose it, I kind of want to get your view on this, is that they calculated that there were quite a few Hillary voters who were so disgusted with Barack Obama that they would vote for McCain, and this would help them with those Hillary voters. And I'm not so sure it does, because in some ways, Hillary voters are coming at this perspective from a kind of, they are very familiar with mainstream feminism. One of the reasons why they wanted, to break that glass ceiling with 18 million cracks in the glass ceiling and so forth. And then here's Sarah Palin, who is a woman governor, but who espouses views that are traditionally considered on the other side of a lot of the feminist issues. So in some ways, she's sort of like a Phyllis Schlafly, who engendered more contempt in the 1970s from, traditional feminists than, other sort of segments of the population. I mean, do you agree with that?
Up to a point. Yeah. I think the one segment of the Hillary vote that's up for grabs is older white women who are less socially liberal, who maybe don't even identify themselves. Nobody who identifies herself as a feminist is voting for John McCain.
Right.
But you've got an older segment of women, socially more conservative, right, who just liked the idea of a woman being president without necessarily ever having wanted to identify themselves, wanting to have to put ideological labels on themselves, but who were tickled with the idea of a woman president, and for whom the things that they've seen Hillary go through, and some of the humiliations and the struggles with family, are things that resound in their own lives. Or that Marie Wilson of the White House Project described this in a way I really liked, which is that you have women who are older who say, okay, Hillary, she's not perfect, I can take the good with the bad, but I just want to see a woman in the White House before I die.
Right.
And so those folks were sort of tickled by the idea of Hillary in a very identity way. But I think if you had found a Republican woman who was as accomplished as
right.
Hillary, Sandra Day O'Connor is the person I think of.
Or maybe Kay Bailey Hutchison.
Right. That I think you would have had a lot of moderate women who would have said, well, look, this is the best of all possible worlds. We got the woman and the experience. But I think That's not what we got in Governor Palin. And that's not to take anything away from Governor Palin, who might be a very smart, accomplished person, but it's a little hard to tell that. And with all the hoopla, this is where I actually think the McCain people have really stepped on their own message, because, when she comes out to give her speech, nobody's going to be focused on, gosh, how smart is she? How much has she managed to pick up on the Middle East in 48 hours? Everybody's going to be focused on what the heck does she say about the grandchild? What does she say about the husband's drunk driving conviction? What about the Alaska?
Did the husband have a drunk driving conviction?
Yes.
Wow.
So, which again, is something that happens in families. It's a normal human thing, and it doesn't make her a worse person.
He's a championship snowmobiler, by the way, and also part Eskimo.
Inuit.
I'm sorry, Eskimo is not appropriate now?
No, Inuit.
Okay, sorry, Inuit. He's part Inuit, and he's a champion snowmobiler. Come
on, you got to get with your talking points here.
Okay.
But nobody's going to be able to focus on whether she, in fact, is an impressive representative of my generation. She's 4 years older than I am, my generation, or not, because they're going to be focused on all this background hoopla, which then, frankly, allows all kinds of stupid gender questions to raise their head. Like, you've now got people out there saying, oh, she has no business running when she has, sick kids at home, blah, blah, blah. So I actually think it was a cynical move that was going to appeal to a very small group of women who already, frankly, I think were going to find some other excuse not to vote for Obama. And B, by their not having vetted and picked a woman with a streamlined message, I just think they've really stepped on their... And C, the other question that I think anybody has a right to ask is, you look at this woman and you think, sorry, but John McCain is a much older man with some serious health problems, and how comfortable would we feel about this woman taking over our whole government in 6 months?
John McCain's mother is still alive, and she's like 96.
Yeah, but how many instances of malignant melanoma has John McCain's mother had?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Eli.
Yeah.
But McCain has serious health problems, and I think people are entitled to give his vice presidential choice a little more than the average scrutiny.
Yeah, listen, I think we're not going to find out anything until she gives a speech, and then she could pass with blazing colors. I'm at the point where I have to say, there's a lot I don't know. I know that they're prepping her right now.
Right. Okay. So what's pass going to mean, Eli? To your mind, what does she have to do?
Well, I think you're going to. I think that she's got to kind of convince people that she's got the kind of charisma and leadership that we think she has, based on, some of the just sort of early press appearances. But there's a big difference between, as standing in a sort of, campaign rally with John McCain and then giving a speech for, 45 minutes to an hour at the convention. And partly, like, traditionally what the vice presidential speech is going to be she's going to introduce the world to herself and her story, but also endorse John McCain and make the argument for John McCain. From the campaign trail perspective, that's basically what she's got to do. And then the next part of the test is after that speech, if she can sort of pass that speech, and it is kind of presidential or vice presidential and also professional, from a political sort of national professional, then she's got to deal with me and the rest of the journalists, going around asking her questions like, who's president of Uzbekistan, that kind of stuff. And she's got to be able to handle that and sort of understand all the nuances of foreign policy and domestic policy and all these things. And she's got such low expectations that if she does a fairly competent job on it, I think she'll do okay. And then there's finally the debate. And I think the strategy, obviously, for her in the debate with Joe Biden is to make Joe Biden look like Rick Lazio against Hillary Clinton. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, why picking on a woman like that? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. And so then, and that's
Biden,
the thing.
Biden did pretty well in managing that in the debates with Hillary, which is why, again, I just wonder about the wisdom of this. And I also wonder, the one sort of typical role of the vice president you didn't mention, which Biden did come out and fulfill last week, is the attack dog role, and to take on the attack dog role starting at the convention. And it's not clear to me, if you're trying to use her as a wonderful symbol of womanhood to go after moderate women voters, how also using her as the attack dog is really going to work out very well for you.
Well, I don't think, that's the whole thing. I think that in some ways, though, that part of her kind of political, we're spitballing here, but part of her political is to sort of sort of like the McCain campaign is doing something I think in some ways the Obama campaign is very good at doing, which is this sort of preemptive victim, like the preemptive like victim of smears and so forth. There's Brian Rogers is putting out all this stuff. Carly Fiorini just came out with like a whole list of talking points of like, stop these smears and attacks on Governor Palin and all this stuff. And I think that part of it is going to be that, the sort of preemptive strike in that respect.
But at this point, Eli, I mean, I would totally agree with you, except they've got such a long list of self-inflicted wounds. I mean, I was saying as we were sitting in the stands at a sporting event yesterday, sort of keeping up with the disclosures over our BlackBerries. It was terrible. I think we paid all the money to go to this sports event, and all I can do is look at my trio. The news is outrunning the spin.
Were you at a Yankees game?
No, we were at the U.S. Open.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, it was a lovely day for it, and I kept sort of forgetting to watch the tennis because I was watching politics. Right. But seriously, I mean, when is the last time that the news outran the spin like this? And I think if
I don't know, but I don't know if this is bad though. I mean, in the end, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they're going to handle it. I think it's true that they're not going to let Bristol Palin give interviews and so forth, but we'll see how she handles it. I mean, it could be. I mean, and part of it is that also. This pick has really energized the base, and I still think that the election. I'm not a Rovian in all senses, but I am a Rovian in the sense that I think that Rove is right. That American politics right now are really all about the base turning out, and not so much about these moderate voters who never can make up their mind. And there's two different views of electoral politics, and I think to a certain extent Obama really energizes the base of the Democratic Party, and McCain really leaves the base of the Republican Party pretty cold. But Sarah Palin, on the other hand, has really, really excited them. So if they can get a lot of people out to the polls and volunteering and all this other stuff in the next couple months, then the pick will seem like brilliant.
Right. So if she gives a brilliant speech, and if there are no more disclosures, and if she doesn't make a gaffe on policy every single day, then you're right. But those are three. But
don't assume maybe she won't make a gaffe on policy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we don't know yet. I'm just saying that there's a lot. It's a big unknown, is what I'm trying to say. And that there's a difference. But some politicians are able to make gaffes, and kind of the public forgives them, and some politicians like a Dan Quayle are able to make gaffes, and it becomes a hilarious punchline in Murphy Brown. So
this is just on a human level, I think this woman, this person, and I would feel the same. I hope I would feel the same way. I'm trying to police myself here. If it were a man, who didn't. I mean, it's not even like Mike Huckabee, who at least had the experience of running for president. But this person is really being thrown into a shark tank, and as I said, you just have no idea what the level of pressure is until you get yourself out there. And the gotcha opportunities are going to be so endless that it's a steeper curve. If you think about the curve that Obama has overcome and looked smart and graceful, every inch of the way. And, yet made some gaffes along the way and had time to recover from them. And she's not going to have any time. This is the fourth quarter now. So I just think that the McCain has really not done himself or her any favors by presenting her a task that's really, she has to make no mistakes, because what they can't afford, and what I think the real risk for them here is that the conversation from here on out is just dominated by, what did Sarah Palin do today? What did Sarah Palin say today? What country did Sarah Palin mispronounce today? What color is Sarah Palin's daughter's wedding dress going to be? And at a certain point, that is going to start resounding negatively to the base, which is just going to get sick of it.
No, the base is going to. The base is sold. I'm sorry, the base is sold. She hunts. Okay, she's a woman. She's very pro-life. As I said, in some ways she is like sort of the realization of the Phyllis Schlafly politician. Remember, Phyllis Schlafly used to go on these rallies and say, I want to thank my husband for letting me... in some ways, Sarah Palin is this independent, dynamic, charismatic woman. She does photograph very well. And a lot of the women that I spoke to here are so excited because finally there is this really dynamic woman who represents their values and, who's at the top of the national stage, and they just feel like that she's one of theirs. So I think that the base is going to be with her. I think the question is, will the mainstream media and the sort of media establishment can kill a candidacy in their own ways, but they just are convincing everybody else that she's just a disaster and doesn't know anything. And, sadly, will they kind of make her out to be a ditz because she's attractive? I hope that that's not the case, but that could be one scenario. We're in the very beginning. It's funny we're having this dialogue now because we don't really have a lot to go on here, do we, Heather? We don't know because how many appearances of Sarah Palin have there been? And then there's the clips on YouTube, and that's about it.
Well, you remind me of another point, which is that McCain apparently had only met her once before.
Yeah, I don't believe that McCain. I mean, they keep stressing how much they vetted her. Really? I'd love to get the details of that vetting.
Yeah, I mean, again, either somebody's incompetent or somebody's lying, and I think the point about you raise a fascinating point, which is that exactly for the set of questions you raised earlier in the session, and you are acting very mainstream media, if I do say so myself. This whole sort of you're shocked that a 17-year-old would get married. You're sort of amazed. This is all so strange. Gosh, like she's pregnant.
I feel like I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to try to get behind. I mean, I'm going to probably vote. I am going to vote for McCain, but I'm saying that I don't feel like I have to carry water. I'm just going to say it. My reaction is, wow, that's pretty young to get married.
Mm-hmm. No, but I think the mainstream, I think the media, it's always, maybe she gives just an amazing, amazing performance, but one speech doesn't erase the novelty value. And in a way, the novelty value is going to be so much, in the same way as people couldn't stop writing Hillary stories last week, even when that was really no longer a very interesting story, except to the people who were covering it. People are just not going to be able to stop themselves from sort of Sarah Palin, Alaska, dysfunctional family stories. Which will, on the one hand, make her seem like a failure outside of the base, and on the other hand, kind of further alienate the base, which I think is a fascinating development, just exactly because of what you said, that there's this group of women who looks at her and says, finally, somebody who looks like me.
Right,
and
who
so
is
to the
like me,
extent
right, exactly.
That she appears to be being smeared in the mainstream media, which I think could happen very easily, it both kind of, again, it diminishes the possibility that she actually brings around any Hillary voters, and it increases the alienation that the religious right feels from the rest of the culture. And ultimately, it's not clear to me that helps McCain.
Except that I think that there was a real chance the religious right was just going to sit out the election because they think that they consider they don't. It's hard for them to forgive McCain in some ways for. His decision to block the overturning of the filibuster in the Senate. I think it was the Gang of 12 or whatever it was called. Yeah. And it's hard for them to forgive him. And some of the base are hard for them to forgive McCain for amnesty, even though on the immigration issue I'm with McCain. But the base was certainly upset about that. And also McCain had this tendency in most of the Bush presidency because he was so embittered towards the Bush White House and the Bush and Karl Rove in particular for what they did to him in South Carolina, that he really kind of went out of his way. It wasn't just that he opposed Bush on issues like military interrogation / torture and things like that, but it was like he went out of his way to say all these people who still really liked Bush. You have to understand, a lot of the conservative base never had a moment where they didn't like Bush. They thought Bush is terrific. That he kind of went out of his way to insult them. And the classic example of this was at the beginning of 2007. Every Republican candidate went to the American Conservative Union annual convention, except for John McCain, who the night of it starts off goes on David Letterman's show and appears in the movie Wedding Crashers and stuff like that. So these little things really left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of the sort of hardcore Republican base and conservative Americans. And Sarah Palin erases that, and I think that was a serious concern for a lot of the McCain sort of strategists, and in that way, the pick makes a lot of sense politically. But, you raise all these questions about, is she really prepared and everything like that, and, if McCain wins the election, then Sarah Palin is the heir apparent, and very little is known about her before, she becomes that heir apparent. There's a whole lot of Republicans who've been passed over as a result of that. From Mitt Romney and Mike Huckabee, maybe, who could have been the next leaders of the Republican Party, to guys like Rudy Giuliani, or even though he's not really a Republican yet, or David Petraeus. There's a whole bunch of people out there who probably were in line to follow McCain. And if McCain ends up winning, then this woman who, was 5 ranks down, was the governor of Alaska, and before that the mayor of a small town, is now the presumptive and sort of de facto heir apparent leader of the Republican Party. It's a strange thing.
Yep, aren't American politics wonderful?
I love American politics. By the way, I got to ask you, because you were in Denver, and I saw the speech on my television in Washington, D.C., but when Hillary spoke, didn't that sound a little bit like Hillary 2012 speech? I mean, there's a lot about her, you know? I mean, Bill Clinton's speech was a great, great speech. I thought Bill Clinton gave the best speech of the convention. But then Hillary gave this speech that I thought was, you know, she didn't, you know, she said, I want you to support Obama, we can't have McCain. But then a lot of it was just all about her and her personal struggle and how she's a mom and she's a daughter and all these other things. Anyway, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I apologize to the commenters who saw me say this exact thing to somebody last week on Blogging Heads, but that speech, and my colleague Michael Cohen said this on the New York Times website first, but that speech was directed to her supporters.
Okay.
And the reason it seemed like a 2012 speech was that it was a 2008 speech, and it was, you know, to my supporters, this is what you liked about me, this is what bond we had, now I want you to transfer that bond to Barack Obama.
Okay.
And that's why that was that way.
Are there no hard feelings in Democrat land now?
I mean, very few.
Okay.
Look, I mean, and I think lots of people who were Hillary supporters might have hard feelings at a personal level, but at a political level, I mean, are perfectly capable of separating out the two.
Yeah.
You know, and then this happens in life, and I think everybody sort of had their catharsis and healing process, whatever you want to call it. And I'm just really, no, I think that story is really...
What about on the Obama side? I'm just curious because there were a lot of Obama supporters, I remember, who thought, like, Hillary had made common cause with Rush Limbaugh and Matt Drudge and Fox News, and, you know, how dare she? You know, I mean, in some ways, I actually at the time thought it was you know, extraordinary Clintonian chutzpah that was going on. But, you know, do you think, and the Obama people are fine with the Clinton people?
You know, nobody has any energy for that right now.
Right, and isn't John Podesta, not John Podesta, I'm sorry, John Podesta
is running the transition team.
He's running the transition team. So that's kind of a, you know, and Joe Biden was always, you know, I think he was clearly an acceptable pick, beyond acceptable pick. He was always kind of an ally, at least for many years, of the Clintons. So in some ways... And,
you know, Obama took Neera Tanden, Hillary's policy director, into his staff, and there's lots of crossover. And I think... You know, I mean, lots of people. Again, there's the personal level where I think everybody on both sides still probably nurses a certain amount of anger and animosity, and there's probably going to be a certain amount of eagerness for payback. Should we get to the position of people handing out jobs and so on? But everybody who's involved in this is very clear on what the job is for the next 10 weeks, and that it's not to be refighting those fights. I mean, in a similar way, as you said, you know, the evangelicals will come home on the Republican side, and people will want.
No, but I don't think they would have. If he would have picked Lieberman, if he would have picked Lindsey Graham, if he would have picked, you know, there were certain people that he would have picked as vice president. The evangelicals and the conservative base would not have cared. They would have said, you know, it would be worse for us to have McCain as president with, you know, I mean, you know, selling out. I mean, it would have been, there's an argument you can make that if you're hosting a popular talk radio show on the AM dial, that it's much worse for you to have President McCain making all these compromises on conservative core values and who considers himself a maverick and not really a conservative than it is to have Barack Obama, who you can just beat the crap out of for the next 4 years.
Right. So, Eli, speaking of family values, I'm actually going to have to cut this off and scoop up my 4-year-old and head to the airport. But I do just want to note the irony that you and I have spent all this time sort of chit-chatting about domestic politics while the SOFA negotiations are
we should talk about
that. You know, what on earth is going on with the SOFA that Maliki, I mean, I think Maliki continues to recognize that he has a fundamental problem with his own base in Iraq on that, and that the administration has pushed and pushed and pushed to try to, and he has actually refused to move, which is kind of interesting. There was a lot of speculation that the SOFA would come out last week to try to disrupt the sort of disrupt the Obama show in Denver, and it didn't. And it's now clear the reason it didn't is that Maliki still doesn't believe he's got a document he can get through his parliament, and that he doesn't believe he'll have a legally binding document unless he gets it through his parliament.
Well, let me say a couple things, because unlike the Sarah Palin, who is Sarah Palin, I mean, this is something I can actually think I can report, because I have been following this pretty closely. One, I think it was determined in June or July that there wasn't going to be an actual status of forces agreement. That's going to be left to the next president, which is something I think, you know, should be coming up more, that the next president, whether Obama or McCain, is going to be determining the long-term presence of American troops in Iraq, and that is a huge, huge difference. So whatever is being negotiated, what's being negotiated right now is a bridge agreement, because the UN mandate for the American forces in Iraq is going to run out in December. Number two, Maliki is in a real bind, because on the one hand, he wants an air force. And that's the U.S. That's going to be U.S. That's going to be the U.S. Air Force for now, because it's going to take probably a long time, at least 10 to 15 years from what I hear, to train up and supply and get everything kind of going if there is going to be an Iraqi Air Force. And that's even unclear because you're talking about some of the most sensitive and the best military technology. Do you give that to a government? And, there's all these questions. So having an Air Force is something that is in any Iraqi leader's interest, including Maliki. My understanding is that the big issue that no one talks about that is a real sticking point, besides, of course, the legal status of not just American soldiers, but American contractors. That's just really key. But it's also, and a lot of people may not know this, Iraq has two intelligence services. There's the Shia Normal Intelligence Service, which is run by the Iraqi government. And then there's a Sunni Intelligence Service, which is run by an old CIA asset named Shawani, who I think is pretty old and sick right now. But that is a wholly owned subsidiary. It used to be of the CIA. After the CIA basically had to kind of give over all the final word to Petraeus, it's now Multinational Forces Iraq. And that Sunni Intelligence Services has played a huge role in rolling up that Iranian network in Iraq. And I think that stuff, besides, when people talk about elements of the surge and the new counterinsurgency strategy, rarely do people discuss the fact that there was this little dirty war against the Iranians in Iraq that has been pretty successful in a lot of ways. The Iranians don't have as much ability to make mayhem as they did a year and a half ago. And so the dilemma from the perspective of the Americans that I talked to on this is that, on the one hand, they do want to support over the long term. They understand how bad it is to have two Iraqi intelligence services. But they don't quite yet want to give up the Sunni one, because if they do, then that means that they don't have a reliable proxy against the potential for Iranian mayhem later on, and other such things like that. And of course,
so Eli, that's a fascinating set of issues. But I have to say, the point here, because the UN agreement expires in December, as you said, and also because currently the only guarantee of U.S. forces status is in a law that the Iraqi government can unilaterally revoke anytime it wants.
Right.
The key here is to have an internationally binding, legally binding agreement protecting the status of soldiers.
Right.
Blogging Heads viewers can all say hello to my husband, who is here to remind me that it's time to get my 4-year-old and go to the airport. But so why are we trying to settle that problem now if the really critical thing is to protect the soldiers in a way that's legally binding?
Because the Maliki, my understanding is the Maliki side of this, which is, I still have to kind of report all this out, but I'll scoop myself, as it were, on Blogging Heads. But my understanding is the Maliki people want to have this as part of any even short-term arrangement. Because they want to have the Sunni intelligence services expire, because the Sunni intelligence service includes people who could be a long-term threat for, over time, a long-term threat to maybe even the government from their perspective. Secondly, of course, the status of these contractors is something that would be part of both a status of forces long-term agreement and also an interim agreement. So those are the sticking points, and I think that I think you're right. But anyway, here's the good news: Anbar, which 2 years ago, according to the Washington Post, was ungovernable, controlled by Al-Qaeda, and there was very little that anyone thought we could do, has now just been sort of transferred over to the local forces there. And as for this issue of the Sons of Iraq, I'm less alarmed by it as some people who watch this, because I think that ultimately when there are provincial elections, they will be they'll be absorbed by the provincial governments, which are more, much closer to these sorts of groups than the federal government, which obviously sees them as a threat. I don't think there's much that the national federal government is going to be able to do about that once there are those provincial elections. So it's a problem, but
which would be more reassuring if the provincial elections hadn't just been postponed.
Well, they'll be postponed, but eventually they'll have provincial elections. I think I'm optimistic that there will eventually be these provincial elections. But I think that that's kind of what it comes down to, and that obviously is a big issue. And it should come up, I hope, in the debates between Obama and McCain, which is that, one of you is going to negotiate a long-term status of forces agreement. What are you going to look for? And I think it would be nice to really pin down Obama on that question, because I think that when he talks about the contingency force, and he doesn't tell us how many people in that contingency force, I think he's kind of evading the question for political reasons. But I'd like to, it would be, I think, important for the American voters to find out exactly where he is on that.
Well, Eli, I'm going to jump, but I'm going to suggest that we get together sometime between now and then and have what are the 3 questions that each candidate should be asked on.
You want to just do a regular thing, Heather? Because we've done different blogging heads, we've had different partners, but I think this is we should just do the Eli and Heather show.
Right. Well,
we'll
Eli, have a great time. Have a great time in Minneapolis, St. Paul,
and
I'll look forward to seeing what Governor Palin has to say for herself.
All right. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Safe travel.